All right, everyone. It is 1300 hours, and we're going to start with our first lecture for Introduction to Psychology. My name is Tanya, and I am your instructor. There's also a teaching assistant, and her name is Diana, and she's a graduate student, and she's in class right now, but she will be here to introduce herself on Thursday. I am responsible for the course overall. I'm responsible for the posting of the final grade. And I am responsible, so if you have questions about the content, including something about the quiz, if you think that the answer to a quiz question is actually wrong, like if you think the answer key is wrong, then contact me about that. Diana is responsible for all the extension requests. So if you need an extension on something, as long as you have 24 hours notice of the deadline, send that to her. If you cross that 24-hour point, then bring that to me, and there's a different process for that, and it's in the syllabus, and I'll cover it today as well. The teaching assistant is responsible for grading all the assignments, and there's about, I think it's 28% of your final grade is based on that. As a matter of pedagogy, I want you to feel comfortable challenging me, and for that reason, I defer as much grading as I can. So the assignments, the written assignments, are graded by the teaching assistant, and I wouldn't question her grading unless you brought that to my attention, right? Then I would look into it. And then the quizzes you do are all auto-graded. So, I've sat down, come up with the questions, identified the answer. And so I want you to feel like there's no bias there. So that's why I set it up in that way. So your homework is to read the syllabus. It's on Brightspace under the content for week 1. Welcome. And it contains the information you need to know about the course. And I'd encourage you to read the syllabus for all the courses that you're in. It's actually quite common to not read the syllabus, and people end up in all kinds of tangles for that. So please read the syllabus. I'll put it on a quiz that's due at the end of the week. It's not a difficult quiz, but it is important that you read it. And it helps you plan and set yourself up for success, because you know when all the deadlines are going to be, and you can plug those into your calendar and get notifications. So it helps you to do that. The syllabus is like a contract. And, sometimes people sign up for a course because they're thinking, well, I don't know if this is really for me. I don't know if I really want to take this class. But you can sit down, read the syllabus, think about it, make your decision. And then if you drop the class, you can get 100% refund. I think it's for about the next week. But after that, you get less and less of your money back. So if you're going to make that decision, right, if you are going to drop the course, it's in your interest to do that sooner rather than later. Otherwise, you get less of a refund. So you'll find everything you need except the textbook on the Brightspace for the class. Is that, you're all familiar with Brightspace? Got it? Good. Okay. And I'll post news there. When I send an email to the class, I do it through Brightspace, but I get bounce backs when people use their Yahoo email or their Hotmail for some reason. And so if you don't hear from me, usually I send out an email once or twice a week. You can go check Brightspace, because I'll also copy and paste it into the news tool. Welcome. And I've divided the course into weekly modules. And so the one for week 1 is set up. And you can find the lecture slide decks there. So I always endeavor to have those posted at least half an hour before class. And what I encourage you to do for this class and for any classes in which the instructor posts their PowerPoint decks, which are really like lecture notes, is to download them, and you can print them off, like I say, as a PDF. And there's a 3-note view, which is pretty cool because it gives you space to write your own notes on it. And I think doing that's important because, as we will learn in the unit on memory or attention, your conscious mind can focus on one thing at a time, right? We think we can multitask, but what's really happening when you're multitasking is that you're focusing on one thing. Maybe there's some unconscious processing and you're switching back and forth. right? When you switch back and forth, well, you're not paying attention to that first thing anymore, right? And you switch back, well, now you're not paying attention to the other thing. And so it's not actually possible. So there's a myth that many students believe, and you think that you're going to sit there and listen to what I'm saying. And a lot of it's kind of dense technical jargon and academic stuff, right? It's coming at you a mile a minute, like a fire hose of information. You can't listen to that and also write notes and also read a slide deck. That's 3 things at once. You can't do that. At most, you'd be switching your attention back and forth over and over. And what else do we know about from research in psychology on human attention? So when you're giving something your focused attention, right, with your conscious mind, you have a conscious mind and an unconscious mind, you can't do that all day long. You can do that for it. Now, it depends on what you're focusing on and how hard it is to focus on, right? Some things are more complex than others. But, you know, for something that's not unduly challenging, it's about 20 minutes. And there's human variation. There's a range around that. So some of us have longer attention spans, and some of us have shorter attention spans. But none of you have an attention span of 75 minutes, which is how long this lecture is. The only person that can listen to this start to finish is me. Okay, so it would be normal for you to be listening to me, and then maybe after 10 minutes, 15 minutes, even if you're acting in good faith, trying to have the best student performance ever, your mind's going to wander, because it has to. Right? Take a little walk, think about lunch, think about something that happened, and then you have to make a conscious choice to bring it back. So there's going to be gaps, right? And so how are you going to manage that? One way to manage it is make it easier for yourself, right? Don't do 3 things at once. You can download the slide decks and have those notes right in front of you. Scroll something on them if that helps you. And then the other thing you can do is just go back and check the recording for somewhere you had a blank space. You will also find the gradebook there, and the slide says that there's a discussion forum for questions that I forgot to create. So mental note, I'll go and do that. Okay. So though I'd like you to read the syllabus, I'll do a kind of quick overview as an orientation. So the textbook is Myers and DeWall's Psychology in Modules, and it's the 13th edition. A very common question I get from students is, can I use a different edition, right? My friend has the 9th edition, and I would say, at your own risk, right? I base all the quiz questions on the 13th edition, but in practice, there's usually very small changes from edition to edition. So if you're going to use an earlier edition, you know, it's better to use the 12th edition than the 1st edition. So my answer to that question is probably at your own risk. There should be lots of copies of this book floating around. And the fastest, I think it's in the bookstore too. Is it? I hope it is, maybe. Good. Okay, great. It's in the bookstore. And you can also buy the ebook directly from the publisher. And that's the fastest way to get it, right? You just buy it off the website, get an access code. Now, there's an upsell on all your textbooks, right? It's, I can't remember how much the ebook is. Like maybe it's something like, I don't know, how much is it? 81. Oh, right. And then they'll try to upsell you for $100 to the launch pad. And what that has is a lot more bells and whistles and content. And I believe it has an adaptive learning thing. It kind of coaches you on the textbook. It quizzes you. So if you would like to have that, other students in the past have recommended it, then that's at your own discretion. In the past, I kind of, I was naive and I followed along with the publisher, and I required the entire course to get that. And for courses that do that, you'll have like a course access code. There isn't one for this class. The reason I stopped was because I had a student come up to me and she said that her parents' credit card was maxed out. And I'd never heard that before because I have a class privilege background where that just wasn't an issue. And so I realized that creating financial barriers probably, I don't know, I didn't want to do that. So I got rid of it. And what that means is that I no longer get students to do those adaptive learning assignments. I used to give them for credit. I don't do that anymore. That is, if you want to do that, you can, and it's about an extra $30. I've also put 3 copies of the text on 3-hour reserve at the library, and you can check them out at the circulation desk. And what that means is that the book is an instructor copy that is behind the circulation desk, literally, like, let's pretend this is the circulation desk and there's a librarian. There are bookshelves behind there, and those are course textbooks. And there's one for Psych 1000 Billsbury, and you can get the book there. You can read it for 3 hours before you give it back. You're not able to take it out of the library. But what that means is that if the textbook is a financial barrier for you, then you can use the reserve copy. It is not, I've had a student get confused already thinking that it was like in the library, like beyond the circulation desks, like on the 2nd floor or something. It's not. So it's not in the library. It's not a library book. It's my book, and it's behind the circulation desk. Is that clear? Good, okay. So the Launchpad is optional. It does have some extra learning resources, and the folks in the past have liked the adaptive learning. The only potential issue there is that I don't use test bank questions, right? And the quiz questions or the adaptive learning quiz questions you'd have in Launchpad are from the textbook publisher's text bank. Probably a very high correlation between doing well on those and doing well on mine. But since the answers to instructor test banks are basically all available online, there's courses like Chegg where people go post them, I had to stop using them and write my own. But my questions are not going to be based on a different textbook. They're not going to be based on a different field of study. There should be, right, a reasonable overlap. And then sometimes I'll have lecture content that's not in the textbook. And sometimes I'll, if I think the textbook authors are in error, which is very common, like a textbook will contain errors as a matter of course, right? If I note that, then remember that for my quiz. But you might like that and it might help you out. So this is what the ebook looks like. And so you would find the reading for this week, The Story of Psychology, over here. And when you open that menu, you'll find a lot of extra optional stuff if you got the Launchpad, all those bells and whistles. And you can ignore that, or you don't need that, and you just go and read the module. What I do want you to notice is that there's, sometimes this is useful for students with dyslexia. You want a computer to read the textbook for you. It has a robot voice. But I've heard from one student in the past that what she liked to do was play it and read along, and she found that helped her keep her focus. And when she was really trying to burn through stuff, she'd increase the speed of the AI voice and read even faster. So that was her technique. You can highlight the book and it'll show up in that notebook tab. And I think that's about it. I wanted you to know about the audiobook option. This is what those adaptive learning assignments that are optional look like. They kind of quiz you on things, but if you don't get the right answer, it'll send you back to the ebook page on the topic, right? It'll kind of coach you a bit. You can ask for hints. So some folks like that as a study tool. 1 year, I required students to do them, and this was the correlation. We'll talk about what a correlation is and what one means. Hopefully you learned this in grade 12 math already. But you can see here the number of these learning assignments that they completed. So I think I assigned like maybe 12 of them or something like that. And then you can see what their average grade was on the quizzes in the course. And since we're going to learn about this kind of thing next week, I'll ask you now, what does that graph show? Don't interpret the graph, because that's another step. But what does the graph show? Kind of small font, isn't it? Yes.
It shows a correlation between the more people did the adaptive learning assignments,
Yeah.
the higher on average their mark was on the quizzes.
Perfect. Yeah. So an inverse relationship, it looked at if it was going, looked like it was going down, would be if it was associated with a lower grade. So that is correct, right? That's exactly what I asked for. But then interpretation would be different. Could I say, looking at this graph, that it is true that doing these assignments increases your quiz grade, results in increasing, that it causes? So, sounded like a no, but I'm kind of a little hard of hearing. Did I hear no or yes?
Yeah, I said no.
No. Why can't I say that? Why can't I make that causal assertion?
Because you're not really sure of how much they know about the course beforehand. There's a lot of things that aren't accounted for. I mean, the people that got 100% or 90% on most of the things could have easily gotten the same mark if they hadn't done it. You can't do that.
Right. So that what you did right there was critical thinking. You're like, what are all the other things that could have caused this relationship? And maybe the students who got the high grades were, let's say, really strong students with previous knowledge. There could be a third variable, right? Maybe they're some students just go do the assignment and they just go jump through the hoop. And maybe that conscientiousness is associated with a higher grade. And maybe if you took the adaptive learning assignments away, they'd do just as well. Maybe they do even better because they have more time on their hands. They're not going through this silly program. So I cannot stand here and tell you that it works for those reasons that this student just identified. But that is a high correlation. I think 0.88 is very high. And then, as I've said before, if you're taking those practice quizzes or doing the adaptive learning assignments, be aware that, right, I might disagree with the textbook. So it might tell you right about something that I tell you wrong about, but where and when I do that, I'll identify it, and I usually highlight it in the slide deck and explain why, of course. So we have 2 75-minute lecture sessions per week, so Tuesdays and Thursday. And, what is the purpose of a lecture? I would say it's ideally interpretation, elaboration. I'll try to find opportunities like I just did to model critical thinking like you just did. And you may or may not find that interesting. The pressure to make science exciting and to hook people in with stories is one that I choose to resist because it pushes me in the direction of distorting information in order to tell a kind of an exciting story, a grand narrative that emotionally captures you and that then is memorable. And I think that can be very misleading. There's definitely an effort to do that in science. So in my graduate program in IO psychology, we had some kind of workshop on it, how to tell these great stories. And a journalist came in, I was sitting there thinking like, I don't know if this is a good idea, right? Like, is that big grand story actually true or accurate? And I think that's the way that many myths have entered psychology. And there's a lot of cultural myth in psychology. And I don't want to be teaching fiction, right? I think that can cause more harm than good. And so my point is not to be interesting or exciting. It's to, in a lecture, it's to relay information verbally. And so sometimes that will be boring, often even, right? So doing science well involves lots of drudgery and detail. And sometimes the content will even be distressing, especially in a psychology course. And sometimes you just want it to end. And sometimes, depending on who you are and what you've experienced and what your goals are, it'll captivate you, right? And that's about your relationship with the material. And it might be a bit about me if I really drone on. I'll try not to do that. But if somebody says to you that my mom or my friend just gave me a lecture, they don't really mean that it was something very exciting, right? It's a bit of a diss. It meant that they endured a didactic monologue. So I don't try to be an entertainer or a comedian or a motivational speaker. I do sometimes disagree with the textbook. It was one that this course initially came together quite quickly, and I asked for a recommendation, and I was given a textbook to use. It's not the one that I would choose if I had room to make that choice. And so some stuff comes up that I'm not comfortable with, like attitudes towards people with disabilities. And so I will raise that when it comes up, usually beforehand. And it also uses an older personality model, but one that I'm glad you're learning about because it's so common, and that's the 5-factor model of personality. There's been an update, a big important update to a 6-factor model called the Hexaco. And so when we do personality, I will talk about the 6-factor model and test you on that. I might ask you how the 5-factor model is different, but I don't really want you to go deep into learning the 5-factor model. Please be quiet unless you're speaking to the whole class. That's because of the way the acoustics of the room work. So if you whisper to your friend, then other students can hear that. I actually can't hear that very well. I think I'm a little hard of hearing anyway, but in a couple of classes beforehand, I've had students come up to me to say they had an issue with whispering because they could hear it. I couldn't hear it. I think these rooms were designed so that my voice carries to you. Rather than that your voice carries to me. In fact, I often have a hard time hearing you if you speak in class, and I'll probably ask you to take your mask down and say it 3 times louder. So if the recording has started, that's when class starts, please enter and leave the room quietly. And you're not my prisoner, you can leave lecture at any time, but if you do decide to stay for the whole lecture, please wait until I dismiss the class to get your things together. Because when people start like putting stuff in their bags and opening and closing notebooks and unzipping backpacks, all the sound created by that can be overwhelming for the recording, and then I can't finish or take questions. So technically, according to the course calendar, this is an in-person class. But I do intend to host a Zoom meeting as I am now, and to record it, but tech issues can happen. There are times that my battery has died and I didn't know, and so no sound was communicated or captured. There's been times that I just forgot to hit record, and the sound quality on the backup device is pretty poor. So what am I saying? Let's say that I'm not able to get a recording working, then I will trudge on with an in-person lecture. And in the worst case scenario, you have the slide deck and, all the information is there. So one of the reasons I have the recording is that it's not possible for you to listen for 75 minutes straight. It's just not. And so the recording is there for you to go back to if you missed something. And so I will try to do that, not guaranteed. There is a playlist of recorded lectures from last year that I hope I can fall back on if there is a technical issue with recording, but I have made some changes to the course since the last run. Be aware that if you ask or answer a question in class, your voice will be recorded. If you want to ask a question in class and not have your voice recorded, you could ask me to pause the recording and I will do that. Or you could just use your laptop, sign into the Zoom room, send me a chat, and I'll get it up here at the podium. So you can maintain your privacy. There is a camera right over there that's recording. And so if you came in class late, and you'd be recorded if you walked in front of it. However, you can just use the back door, or you could sneak around it. What else? Yep, well, and you can also talk to me in person after class. I will also stop the recording after I've given, I'll give you a chance to ask any on the record questions. And then after I stop the recording, you can talk to me then as well. Or you can book a meeting. All right, on to assessment. So there's a part about assessment that contains how percent grades are converted to letter grades in the syllabus. Grades of A refer to excellent performance. Grades of B refer to good performance. Grades of C refer to satisfactory performance. Satisficing can be a great strategy, an adaptive strategy, right? C's get degrees. When I ask students what kind of grade they want to get, most answer they want an A. Unless you're going to graduate school, that's not really something you need. But please aim for a C minus. Okay? D's refer to marginal performance, and they hit your GPA pretty badly. And if you get too many of them, you can end up on academic prohibition. So you want to be aiming for a C minus. That's what I consider satisfactory performance. And satisfactory is great. Okay. So if you want to go to professional school, you want to go to med school, law school, grad school in psychology, then you can try to aim for the A's. But if what you want to do is at the end of this is go out into the workforce, right, then an employer will care that you graduate if they even care that you have a degree. And a lot of the jobs that folks go out to do with undergrad degrees in psychology are one that they could do with no undergrad degree, right? Like working in a care home or as a ward clerk. So think about, what your context is, what you want to do and what you need to get in order to get that. This is in the syllabus. So grades are somebody's assessment of your performance on some task. And it's usually somebody that has power in a system. And there's criteria for grading that range between vague to clear and fall somewhere on a continuum. They're not going to be perfectly clear. And the criteria range from subjective to objective. There's always going to be some subjectivity. In the social sciences, there's even more. It's not as subjective as a math test. And they range between, unreasonable and reasonable, between fair and unfair. And graders vary in their expectations. So let's say that you had 3 teaching assistants in a course. Well, maybe one of them is really lenient and another one of them's really tough. And a grading scheme does not test you on everything that you've learned. So you could get a failing grade in a course and still have a really worthwhile experience where you learned something that did you a lot of good. And I think that's more important than the F on a transcript, right? You'll learn things and develop skills and insights that aren't reflected in someone else's grading scheme. And the people who teach, the people who write textbooks, people who come up with questions and answer keys are not omniscient and they're not infallible. So in psychology, you find a lot of speculation that's presented as fact. And there's a lot of overgeneralization and reification. Does anyone know what reification is? So I keep a pack of salt with me in my bag because I have to explain this so often. I might not find it now. Oh, there it is. So this has an objective existence, right? I can touch it, I can feel it. We can all agree that it's salt. Actually, it's pepper. But your IQ score doesn't have this kind of existence, right? It's an idea, right? Your score on a test for depression, somebody's diagnosis of depression doesn't have this kind of objective existence. Okay, so that comes up a lot in psychology as a science. There's a lot of reification because you might really believe your score on a test and kind of, or believe a diagnosis and forget that in a way it's a story, right? That there's some level of social construction there. Okay. Grading keys do contain errors. A colleague here helped me out by giving me his intro psych exam questions when I was struggling to find the time to put together quiz questions. And I went through them and I had to dump 20% of them because there was some kind of error in the key. For instance, it says that C is the right answer, but I know that C and D are both right answers. But if you answer D, you get that wrong. And so that's why I strongly encourage you to always ask for your quizzes and your midterms and your exams back to go over them and to catch something, because there's a probability that there's an error in there. That's a good learning experience too, for you and for the instructor. Why did I go through all this? Because grades are not a valid measure of self-worth, okay? In my view, your worth as a person is unconditional and non-contingent, right? It's based on the fact that you're a human. And to me, it doesn't depend on your performances, academic or otherwise. You might have a performance, and you can judge that performance as having been, okay, I think that was a good performance because it achieved the objective, or maybe it didn't, and we'll change something and do something differently. But I'd like you to be able to disassociate that from your self-worth. A lot of students think of grades as a measure of self-worth, kind of like get an F, therefore I'm a bad student, therefore I'm a bad person, right? Please don't go down there, right? Let's try to separate those. So a student who gets an A is not worth more than a student who gets an F. A student who prepares is not worth more than a student who's unprepared. And a student with high cognitive or academic ability is not worth more than a student with low cognitive or academic ability. And sometimes that just means different cognitive or academic abilities that aren't recognized within the systems by which we evaluate what good and bad is. Okay, and so if you're on academic probation, you're not worth less than the valedictorian. The student who cheats is not worth less than the student who is honest. If you do cheat and I catch you, then there's consequences and processes, but I don't see that as impacting kind of your worth in any way. And anytime you elevate someone as having higher worth, of being a kind of higher class human, then you dehumanize someone else, and probably not fairly, because how much do you or we really know to judge that, to make that judgment, right? What legitimate authority do we really have to do that? So we are in an institution, right, in a system which has its culture and its norms and its expectations and its rewards and punishments, right? And if you cheat, then there's an unpleasant process around that you might want to avoid. And if you get A's, there's some privileges associated with that. You might, I don't know, win some scholarship or something, right? So I try to understand it in that way. And so I don't have more or less time for you based on your academic performance. So in grading, like when I look at class averages, I don't love DFW outcomes. And ideally, when I look at a grade distribution, I like to see the average around a C or a B. Once I taught a stats class, and I did my best, and there was an A average on the exam, and that had never happened before. I got in trouble for it. Sorry, this was not a planned lecture, but that came back to me. And they gave exams to someone else who tried to grade them as hard as possible to bring the 92 average down to an 80. And he got it down by 3%. Sometimes by picking on things that were really subjective. So if there's a class average of an A, it either means that the test was too easy or I did a damn good job. So normal averages are around like a C or a B. When I'm wondering if like the grading schemes look appropriate, I like to see that students who the lingo is benchmark students, like the students who are kind of really engaged, and I know them because they've emailed me, asked a question, kind of look like they care and are kind of into it, right? Usually those ones kind of end up with some kind of an A. And then when and where DFWs happened, I would prefer to know that those students are ones that might be what we call passively disengaged. So just like not handing things in. And sometimes I get that. Sometimes people will just not hand something in, 0, 0, 0, and 0. So it's funny, I once looked on Rate My Prof, and the students who review my classes as being really easy A, foolproof, tend to just be sort of engaged and sort of into it and do the thing, right? And then the students who sort of say that it's really, really hard are often ones that were actively disengaged. So there is a DFW rate for every class, so I assume it will happen. It was 19% the first time I taught this class, got it down to 12%. Last time I taught the class, made some changes. I've made some more changes that I hope will support your success even more. There are dates for you to drop the class. So you have, I think it's, you want to check the academic calendar that's online or the undergraduate calendar that's online. You can get a full refund. You have about a week to do that. And then there's a last date to, sorry, I just noticed an error in my slide. You can say it says, no, last day to drop without a W. Okay, yes, January the 18th. That's about a week from now. Then if you stay in after that and drop the class, you'll get a smaller part of your tuition back and you'll get a mark on your transcript. That's a W. A W is GPA neutral. It just tells somebody that is looking at transcript for some reason that you tried something out and it didn't work. But it's not a mark of shame in any way. All right, so when I ask students on the first assignment, you know, what's your grade goal for this class? Historically, something like 65% come back saying they want an A. But let's say that that wasn't your goal. Let's say that your goal was actually to get a DW or F, and you can see that there's a portion of students who do every year. So let's say that was your goal and you wanted to go in that direction. Then how could you achieve that? Okay, don't read the syllabus or refer to it. Don't do the readings. Okay, don't listen to the lecture, answer questions. Definitely don't download the PowerPoint decks. That's one of your best helpers ever. Don't do that. Okay, don't read my emails that I sent to the class or check the news on Brightspace. Take the tests unprepared. Don't have your notes together and sort of organized in such a way that you could go and be like, oh, I know where the answer for that is, and go look it up. Okay, miss the deadlines. That's a big one, including the deadline for extension requests. And one of the best ways to do that is to engage in self-undermining. And that's a protective strategy that students can use if they associate their grades with their self-worth. So let's say that you believe that. You believe that your grades are a valid measure of your self-worth. And so you know when you submit something that you could get an F on it, and that would be a big blow. How could you protect yourself from that threat to self-worth? Could you come up with like alternative reasons? Like, let's say if you procrastinate, you just don't have any time, and then you take the test really unprepared and you get a low grade. What does that function to do psychologically? Yes.
Will inspire you to manage your time better?
So let's say that I'm really afraid that if I see an F, that it means I'm a bad person because I've associated it with my self-worth. I didn't sever that connection in my mind. I'm really afraid of getting a bad grade. And so I'm too scared to study, because if I studied and then I took the test and I got a low grade, I would feel bad about myself. So what strategies could I use as basically as ego defense mechanisms? Yes.
Just don't do it.
Just don't do it. Excellent. Because that way, when it comes back as a 0, it doesn't mean that I'm a bad student and a bad person. It's because I just sort of didn't care and didn't hedge it. So that's an excellent one. That's a good strategy. What about procrastination? Yes.
Yeah, because then you can just tell yourself you didn't put enough effort into it.
Perfect. Yes, you tell yourself that you didn't have the time, like you scrambled. And in fact, when you scrambled and you pulled off a B, that's not so bad. You can feel good about that. And if people procrastinate and leave things to the last minute and end up getting an A, unfortunately, that serves to reinforce it. And they do it over and over again. And we'll learn about that kind of process in the unit on memory. So yes, those were excellent strategies. Just procrastinate and just don't hand it in as defense mechanisms to solve the problem of associating grades with self-worth. But a better strategy, the one I tried to sell you on, is just don't make that connection. Go right ahead, do a reasonable amount of work, get that F, come see me, we'll talk about it, we'll figure things out and keep going from there, right? Fall, pick yourself up again, keep going, rather than just completely talk about it. Okay. So other great ways to do poorly are not getting your accommodations arranged. Everyone knows about the Fred Smithers Centers. Some folks just need extra time on stuff. Another good strategy is to not use your resources, either in the class, in the institution, right? There's lots of student services. So if you're having let's say a personal issue with your mental health, we have a counseling center. If you don't know what you want to do or why you want to do it or what you're doing here at all, we have career counseling for that. If you're not feeling well, we have a student health service. And then you also have resources within yourself. All right. And then another good way is to not talk to me about your fears or concerns. Just assume the worst, make a decision, drop the class in panic, put up with things you resent, burn with the resentment instead of just telling me. So then we could have a conversation about it and probably work it out. And then sometimes students find ways to cheat and assume that I won't notice or follow up on it if I do. Okay. Pause for a moment. I used, in this last slide, I used a strategy, a certain type of psychology, a certain practice in psychology. Did anyone recognize that?
Reverse.
Yes, yes. What's reverse psychology? How does that work? Tell me more about it. Yes.
It works on the human desire to do exactly the opposite of what you're being told.
Yeah.
So just say, oh, you should do all of these things that you don't want somebody to do.
Yes, and then you take advantage of that little characteristic of the human mind, which is to argue back and say, well, no, actually, I am going to study. And if I'm mad about something, I'm going to speak up. And then you kind of lead the person down with what you sort of think is the right path. So an example that a way you might experience this is with exhortations to exercise more. Like exercise is so good for you. It's so good for your mental health. It's so good for your body. There's all kinds of research demonstrating this. You can't really argue with it, but I mean, how many of you actually exercise every day? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you're definitely a minority in this class. Nobody on Zoom said so. This is an enrollment of 100. So based on that hand count, 6% of you do it. And that's corroborated by research. So if you look at the percentage of people who eat healthy and exercise and they don't smoke, it's a super low percentage, right? I think it's something like 3% of the population. And what happens when you tell yourselves that, I really ought to be exercising, what does your brain say to you? What does your mind say to you? You should exercise for half an hour a day. Where does your mind go? I'm trying to exercise every day. I can tell you where my mind goes. I'm too tired. I don't want to have to change and get sweaty. Yes.
My mind immediately goes to, man, that's a half hour I could be using doing something else.
It's not a good use of time. Like, who wants to be on one of those like treadmills running nowhere in a gym? I mean, geez. And you get sweaty. See what your mind does? You sort of tell yourself, you should do this. It's actually true. And what your mind does is come up with 100 reasons why you shouldn't. And then at the end of the day, most of you bought into those reasons. Right? There's 6% of you that can do that. And I really wonder how do you do that? How do you make yourself do that?
Put I have the same feeling every day. I don't want to go to the gym, but I just say I need to. So I just dress up, take all of my stuff, and while I'm walking to the gym, I'm like, oh God, I don't want to go.
So you have discipline that
I
is
just do
greater.
it.
So you have that arguing voice in your head that's like,
Yeah.
and you just do it anyway. I saw some other hands from people who actually do it. How do you get past that voice in your head?
We're on the varsity soccer team, but like there's so many like activities and intramurals on campus, so sports is like the best way in my mind because you're doing it with a team. You're not alone. So
Yeah, that's an amazing goal setting technique that works for lots of different goals, and it's just do it with other people
Yes.
who share the same goal. Use that force of peer pressure to achieve your goal.
There's so much fun stuff on campus, like cycling classes. There's a lot to do at the homework, so.
Okay, maybe I'll look into that. Any other good So that was a really cool one. We'll come back to that in the unit on motivation. Can achieve your goals with the help of your friends. Anyone else? Did I hear someone? Oh, 2 new messages. Sorry, I forgot to scroll down on the Zoom chat. I apologize. Okay. But you get the idea that there's an undermining voice in your head that's telling you to do the wrong thing. And there's various strategies that you can use with yourself or with your clients to get over that. Okay, on to assessment, since we have about half an hour left in the class. So 72% of your grade is based on tests, quizzes, some more approachable, okay? And those contain content from textbook and lecture. If I think that something is really important and that you need to know it, this is a question for you. Do you think that I, as the instructor, am likely to mention it in the lecture or put it on the slide deck? Yeah. Okay, so if you're pressed for time, keep that in mind. There absolutely are questions that are just in the textbook that I don't lecture on, but that's, if I think something's really important, right, I'd have a bias to mention it or put it on a slide deck. The 72% is broken up across the course as 12 weekly quizzes that are worth 6% each. They are open book. Taking a test, writing a test, preparing for a test are all skills. They are skills that you learn with practice, okay? So the first time you take a quiz, well, you had whatever your process was for reading the book. Maybe you didn't highlight it that time, right? You had whatever your process was for notes. Maybe you scrawled things and you can't read your own handwriting. So maybe the first time your score would be a little lower than it would be after you've kind of gotten all of those things in place, because you're going to learn that there's a certain way that you like to take notes, right? You're going to learn that there's a certain way that you like to prepare. And so that gives you room to get that F and then recover from it. Find your footing and keep going, okay? They are 30 questions, 30 minutes, and they're auto-graded. So as soon as you hit submit, you should be able to see your grade. That's like instant feedback. And I will release the answer key for the incorrect responses after everyone has written the quiz. My aim is to make them available on like Thursday afternoons. They're due by Sunday at the stroke of midnight, 11:59 p.m. So people are going to be writing the quizzes at different times. So you'll have to, and then if everyone gets it done by Sunday night and there's no extensions, then you'd get the answer key back on Monday. And prepare for that by reading the text and reviewing your lecture notes. What we know from memory research is that you retain most information after you've encountered it. And then there's something called the forgetting curve, and it drops off a lot and then it stabilizes. So what is that? What kind of strategy does that suggest you should use in terms of when you write your quiz? Yeah, well, I'll give 2 lectures. So probably, let's say that you've done so this would be your maximally efficient strategy would be to do the reading before the lecture. Then in the lecture, it's going to reinforce those concepts. It'll help lock it in. Okay, and then let's say after the second lecture, go over your notes and then take the test right then before you start losing the information. That would be your maximally efficient strategy based on research on these sorts of things. Actually, once you take a course, you forget a lot of the course afterwards. So a year after you've taken a course, how much do you still remember? Okay. There is a comment online that I want to address in case it scares anybody. And why is this thing not working? Sometimes it stops working. And that comment states that the tests require memorization and tank your grade. That comment came from a student who had never submitted anything. So, 0 on assignment 1, 0 on the week 1 quiz, 0 on the week 2 quiz, 0 on the week 3 quiz, 0 on assignment 2. He never opened it. And I sent him a few emails and I referred him to the early assist program and he didn't respond. And then on February the 21st, dropped the class and wrote that comment. I imagine that's an ego defense, makes him feel better about that. Maybe he was associating grade and self-worth, but I don't want you to see that and then think that that's true. They don't require memorization because they're all open books and they're deliberately small stakes so that you can, if you have some test anxiety, have the room to figure that out. All right, so that's the test. Any questions about that? No? Good, okay. Assignments are next. So this is kind of like the applied part. And this is a place where I'm trying to apply principles from psychological research to supporting your success. And so there's 3 assignments. The first one, which is due at the end of this week, is worth 5%. The second one is worth 18%. That's the most I've ever made anything worth in a class in my life. So far, it's always been up to 10%. And then the third one at the end of the course is worth 5%. And so the questions that you're going to see on assignment 1 they're not like hard questions. You don't need to go look up things on Google Scholar. You don't need to even read the textbook. They're questions like, right, why are you taking this course? And I'd ask you that because knowing why connects you to your intrinsic motivation, right? What obstacles might you encounter? You probably know a lot right now about the obstacles that you can encounter. If you are a procrastinator, you already know that, right? If you're struggling with your mental health, you already know that. But there are things that you can do to navigate that, right? There's resources you can use at the university. There's resources that you have in your personal life, like your friends. You just are right, working with a team. Like you all have a team somehow. And there's personal resources that you have, like your own conscientiousness, your own work ethic that you can draw on. I have posted a rubric for all the assignments, and it's written to the TA, but I want you to have a chance to look at that so you can kind of see where I'm coming from and how you'll be evaluated. So here's what assignment 1 looks like. Very scared of this. So the first question is, why are you taking this class? I'm genuinely interested. I'd like to know what brings you here. And then that also functions to connect you to your intrinsic motivation. I'm going to ask you what your grade goal is for this course. And you can give a range, say like, I don't know, C to B. And then when I ask the TA to code that, I tell her to pick the bottom of the range. Right? So if your grade goal is like a B to an A, then that means to me that reaching your goal is getting a B. And then I ask you why you picked that one, right? Why that? And that's because historically, most students have said that they want an A, and then they give a reason that connects to extrinsic motivation. It's kind of like someone else, society, culture taught me that A's are good and you should get A's, so I want an A. And that has a lot less motivating potential because it's not really something that you identified, right? It's not kind of coming from your true self. What's the word for that in self-determination theory? It's lacking some kind of authenticity. Oh, it's non-autonomous, that's the word. Anyway, okay, so that's what I've typically seen before. But I would like you to try to own it a little more than that, right? So maybe you want that A and that works for you in your personal context. That's the right choice for you because you want to go to grad school in psychology and be a psychologist. That's not everyone's path, right? You might say that you want the satisfactory, perfectly satisfactory, very acceptable score C- because you just need to graduate and you have to manage your time because you're juggling school with a part-time job. The next question is the most important one in terms of achieving your goal. How do you plan to manage your time so that you'll succeed? So the rule of thumb for how many hours a week you should be spending on each of your courses is 10 hours a week. So tell me what that's going to look like. How are you going to find that? So in the past, students who achieve their goals tend to have a really clear, specific plan, kind of like a paragraph long that says, well, I have a window of time after I have dinner and before I put my kid to bed while she's watching her cartoons. And that's when I'm going to get the readings done because I can get them done, a module done in about 25 minutes. And then this is the system I'm going to use for my notes. And it's kind of like a believable plan. But then the students that didn't achieve their goals, that fell far, far short of them, had really vague plans. In fact, they weren't really plans at all. So one of them was, I will get my readings done between lectures. There's really no other time you can do it unless you're like actually reading the textbook in the lecture, which would be super inefficient. So that's kind of like a non-plan. Another one was, I have a calendar. Okay, what are you going to do with it? Get the idea? The next one is to look through the course timetable and the syllabus and think about it in terms of your other responsibilities. Is there, for instance, a time when you think you might want to ask for an extension? What if there's 1 week when you have 3 midterms? Could be helpful to you in achieving your goals to see that coming up from afar. Maybe you want to ask for, let's say, a religious accommodation around Ramadan. You do all of those things, but let's try to see them coming. I'll ask you what's a potential barrier that could impede your success in this class, where success isn't kind of what academic culture thinks of you. It's your own goal that you own, right? That's authentic. Okay? And you probably already know what those are. Then I'll ask you what personal resources, notice the S, it's plural, so at least 2, could you leverage to support your success in this class? You all have them. And then I'll ask you to go and check out the resources and services that are available to you at the institution, right? Look through it. And maybe there's a resource that you could see yourself using. And then why did you pick that one? And then the next question was suggested by Tom Brophy, who's the director's AVP Student Services. What's the process for accessing that resource? Because if you know that now, right, if and when you need it, you'll have that next step in mind. You've already envisioned it. That makes it easier to go do it. Then I'll ask you, what adaptive action do you plan to take if you find yourself struggling? Something you'll hear me talk a lot about in this class is adaptivity and adaptivism. And if you have a goal, right, and it's a good goal, let's just buy the goal for now. There's some things you can do that'll help you to achieve the goal. And there's things that you could do that would not help you achieve the goal. They'd be maladaptive. So let's say that your goal is to get a 60 on the quiz. So carving out some time to read the text and doing it would be adaptive, but procrastinating would be maladaptive, right? That's not going to help you achieve your goal. Binge drinking is another one, right? Those are maladaptive responses. So a good way around procrastination is something called the Pomodoro technique. You make it's based on those tomato timers that people used to use in the kitchen. Ticks for 25 minutes, and then you get like a 5-minute break. You can condition yourself, we'll talk about what conditioning is, to work while it's ticking, and that can be a great way to pull yourself out of procrastination. Accommodations. So there's a center for students with disabilities, and now later on in the course, we'll talk about disability, what that means, There are medical models and social models. The Fred Smithers Center uses a medical model. So you have to get an appointment with like a doctor or a psychologist who will give you a diagnosis. Then you get a letter and you take the letter to the disability advisor. Then they decide what the accommodations are, and then that is communicated to your instructor. If you have a medical condition, absolutely, you should be using that system, get your accommodations. And that's important because then the university is sort of legally required to comply. However, there's a lot of ways that medical models in psychology fall very far short. There's ways that systems can fall far short. How easy is it to get an appointment with a doctor here in Nova Scotia? There are like 80,000 people on the wait list for a family doctor. There are doctors that you can access at the SMU Health Service quite easily. So that's a wonderful thing we have at SMU. But if you've engaged with those systems, you might, they don't cover everything, and they don't recognize sort of complex stress disorders. There's some hair splitting over, what's really PTSD. And so if that system for any reason isn't meeting your needs, then come to me and we can figure something out. So another accommodation that I provide is content warnings, and that reflects the fact that psychology is a discipline that discusses sort of difficult and controversial issues. It's not like chemistry or physics in that way, unless you're studying like the pattern of a bullet or something. But it's in psychology we talk about things like suicide and self-injury and abuse and depression and trauma and death. And psychology has been, and it continues to be used in oppressive ways. So there's a history around IQ testing that has to do with like immigration, right? And keeping people who weren't white from coming into America. So there's a lot of that sort of complex social history. And I also respect that trauma is complex and personal. So there's some cases where I know that there's problematic content or there's content that could be triggering, and I'll mention that in a class email. But because this trauma is complex and personal, because it's not always recognized by the systems, especially the systems that create it, there might be something you want to let me know about, okay? And then I'll accommodate that. And so what I typically do is I'll mention it in an email, and I'll have an agenda slide. I'll say this content's coming up on these particular slides, so you know what slides it's coming up on. And then I kind of sandwich it. So I'll have like a blue screen. I'll count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, discuss the content, and then I'll blue screen it again so that you know that it's over, and I'll count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. And that is a very short amount of time. That's a very small thing to do for somebody that might be emotionally flooded by certain content, right? Giving them 2 seconds to take a few deep breaths. That's not doing much on my end, but it is something that I can do. My warning systems are not perfect. In the past, I've just like missed content. I didn't know there was like a slide with like cut arms on it it didn't even occur to me that somebody could find that triggering, and it was quite upsetting for some students. So if something comes up like that, then again, please let me know so that then I revise my own systems. So with regard to time management, I think something that's important to understand is that this is a condensed course. Intro to Psych is typically a full year course, right? Like start in September, end in April. But at SMU, right, this course is 1 semester. And what that means is that it's kind of a lot of reading because I'm cramming the entire textbook into 1 semester. I hope that the open book, no exams component kind of balances for that a bit. So you'll be reading 4 to 6 modules per week. That's like 2 or 3 modules per lecture. And that works out to an average of 50 pages per week. When you do your first module, and a module shorter than a chapter, it's designed to be read in 1 sitting in about sort of half an hour-ish. They actually give you a strategy for reading a lot fast called the SQ3R method. It was developed by a psychologist for the military during World War II when people had to just cram textbooks, and it was kind of a life or death thing. And it's a different strategy where you don't sort of start from the top and go to the bottom. You actually read like those chapter summaries, and you read the summary at the end. and then you go and read what's in the middle, sort of time permitting. Okay, so it's a strategy for reading very efficiently. You'll find the timetable and due dates in the course schedule. I had to create some kind of structure, and so I made everything due at Sundays at, oh, that's a mistake. It says 5 p.m. That's not true. Sorry, that's not updated from last time. It's actually 11:59 p.m. 2,300 hours, 59 minutes. Okay, so I apologize for that error, and I'm noting that as an error. And the reason why I moved it forward was because some people just didn't like the 5 p.m. thing. Like I based it on a sort of public service model for it used to be Fridays at 5 p.m. Like you're done work and you go home and take the weekend off. But I didn't realize that a lot of students have shift work, right? And work Fridays because there's no class at SMU on Fridays. So that's why I changed it. So now it's not Fridays at 5 p.m. It's Sundays at 11:59 p.m. But that doesn't mean you have to take your work home on the weekend, right? You can choose to get it all done by like Thursday evening if you want to. If you need an extension, request that from the teaching assistant 24 hours in advance. That is granted automatically, no explanation needed. You're an adult, I'm an adult. I trust that you can manage your affairs, and if you have a reasonable need for an extension, you'll use that appropriately. All students have in the past. If you miss the deadline, then I'm more concerned, and then submit the extenuating circumstances form, which actually does require an explanation to me within 3 days of the missed deliverable. So stay on top of things, and you'll be just fine. This is an example of what the course schedule looks like, and I've broken it down for you as finely as I can, so you know how many pages of reading, and you can use that information to kind of help plan your schedule a little bit. You can figure out what your reading speed is. If it's 3 minutes a page, 65 pages of reading is 3 hours and 3¼ hours of reading. You can find time for that in your schedule. Reading speed might be slower for content you find more difficult or less interesting. So I like social psychology, and I'll read an article or a chapter on that like a hot knife through butter, right? Like at like 1 minute a page, but I don't love like the I don't know, sensation and perception. And I find the material more challenging. And that's like a 5 minute a page for me. So you want to plan for 10 hours a week. You should be doing that for all of your courses. And you can set yourself up for success by, you know, making a good plan, committing to it, and then revising it or adapting it as necessary. And that's an assignment question. There's some marketing that might suggest to you that a typical university student life is to sort of take 5 courses and get A's in all your courses and also be president of this society and on that team and doing like a lot of extracurriculars, and it's all so fantastic. Probably not the way it really works. If you want to get high grades in all your courses, that would be like a lot of time in the library. If you're balancing a full-time course load with a part-time job can be quite challenging. A lot of students do that. Combining that with extracurriculars would be a lot, right? Here's my favorite piece of marketing. Study at hip cafes, have lunch in the park, be back in time for your next lecture, right? With dining, shopping, and entertainment just steps away, you'll find many exciting ways to spend time between your classes. Realistically, if you're striving for, let's say, academic excellence and a full course load, you're not going to be going downtown or going hiking or to the beach between classes, right? That's marketing. That's not realistic, okay? Spending your time with your nose in a book or in front of a screen. So it's so, you know, most people think of a full course load as 5 courses. 3 is also a full course load. And that could work better for you if you're also taking a part-time job or doing a lot of extracurriculars, okay? And you can also be a part-time student. Okay, so think about what you need in order to get balance. Right, so what you see on the website and the glossy brochure is kind of creative writing by folks in the marketing profession. It might not be what works for you, right? You have to think about your circumstances, your goals, your constraints. Do you have kids? Or are you taking care of elders? And right, make the right decision for you that reflects your personal contexts and capacities. I'm going to skip through the next slides because they are in the syllabus and I'm a little bit behind time. But what I hope for you in this course is that you'll learn something valuable on the subject of psychology that is useful enough that it's worth kind of the cost of the course, tuition and opportunity cost. That's what I hope to achieve. And I also make mistakes, and you're very welcome to challenge me and to bring up issues as they occur. And, you know, we'll both make mistakes. I'll strive to relate to you in a way that's sort of competent, caring, and ethical. And sometimes I'll miss the mark, right? And we'll get through that. And so will you. I'm going to skip ahead because we'll come back to the adaptability model to say that there is a potential for a faculty strike this semester. You guys aware of that? Hands up, yes, you knew about this. Everyone knows about it. Okay, do you have any questions about that? Yes.
So it's a straight, your TA and
The teaching assistants are not unionized. Yeah, so there are 2 faculty unions. They are both in negotiations with the university. One of the negotiations is happening today. And if the unions can strike a deal, there's no strike. So I can't tell you there is going to be a strike. I can't tell you there's not going to be a strike. It's up in the air right now. And sorry, I can hear you. There's no class. Cut it out. Yeah. Okay. I guess, yeah. Thank you.